The film which you are about to see is the account of the nightmarish mauling which befell a man and 2 females in northern Canada. Originally from the small Inuit town of Sanirajak in Nunavut, Canada, local resident Elijah Kaernerk was a typical northern Canadian who loves to go hunting and loves to go to the wilderness to get away from his everyday life. And one such place that he would use to get away was a small cabin not 20 to 30 miles away from his house. Also, being that this area was also close to the Arctic Circle usually meant that the ground was always covered in a blanket of snow with a gray dull overcast in the sky, with the area also being known for an abundance of Arctic wildlife such as the walrus, Greenland sharks, harp seals, killer whales, and of course, the ever dangerous and deadly polar bear. Which now brings us back to our story. On the snowy morning of August 10th, 2021, Elijah and his wife had woken up, ate breakfast, and called his sister-in-law to come over so that they could start their plans. And what exactly were their plans? Well, Elijah was planning on taking his wife and sister-in-law to a nice tucked-away cabin in the middle of the wilderness for a weekend of peace and relaxation. Especially since August 10th was a rare, comfortable 48 degrees Fahrenheit, he didn't want to waste any time. And so after his sister-in-law arrived, they all conversed for a little bit and took off on their ATVs. Then about 15 to 20 minutes into their trip, as they were driving along the trail, they would run into one of the locals as he managed to try to flag Elijah down to tell him a warning. For you see, evidently not even a few miles north, the man spotted a starving polar bear wandering around looking for its next meal. Which luckily for the man, he was a few hundred yards away when he spotted the beast and managed to slip away without being noticed. Undeterred though, Elijah believed that they would be just fine and kept heading forward towards their cabin. Then once they arrived, Elijah quickly turned off the ATVs and began scouting the area for the polar bear or any other wildlife creature that they should be worried about. Though after being greeted by deathly silence, he felt confident that they were alone and started making his way back towards the cabin. After a little while though, he wanted to go back outside and walk around for a little bit while his wife and sister-in-law stayed inside and continued to make themselves comfortable. Then once he stepped outside, he began walking towards the ATVs to make sure that they were still okay, then began walking towards the tree line to see what was around the cabin. Though after walking for a few minutes, he managed to make it a few hundred feet away, and then suddenly, without warning, it happened. Without even noticing, he walked right in front of a massive polar bear eating the already picked through carcass of a dead animal, only a few feet in front of him. Frozen in fear and still hidden behind some trees, Elijah just stared at the beast as it ate. Well, that was until the bear lifted its massive head and quickly noticed Elijah hiding behind the trees. And seeing a newer, fresher food source, the massive behemoth stood up tall and gave out a menacing roar, which in turn immediately sent shivers down Elijah's spine, as his blood simultaneously ran cold throughout his entire body, as he knew exactly what this now meant. Then the bear started walking towards him, and without a second thought, Elijah began running in the opposite direction, back towards the cabin. But he would soon find out that running away was the worst decision that he could have made, as the bear rapidly caught up with him and in mere seconds tackled him to the ground, and before he could even turn around to protect himself, was already attacking him. Then as they heard the cries of her husband coming from the forest, Elijah's wife and sister-in-law came running out to help. But as soon as they did, the polar bear tore its attention away from Elijah and immediately began charging his wife down and tackled her to the ground. Then desperate not to get his wife killed or hurt, Elijah quickly stood back up and started yelling and throwing tree branches and rocks back at the bear to get its attention. But exactly like he wanted, the bear turned back around and began charging Elijah once again. Then with nowhere to go, Elijah ran around the ATV in an attempt to create space between him and the bear. Then as the bear was busy chasing him, his sister-in-law grabbed his wife and began carrying her back towards the cabin to tend to her wounds. Unfortunately for Elijah though, the bear quickly outmaneuvered him and tackled him back to the ground. Then as he could feel what felt like a car parked on his back, he just as quickly felt the bear's teeth ripping into his skin and tearing at muscle. Then seeing Elijah was in trouble, the two women panicked and began yelling and throwing things at the bear again, which again immediately got the bear's attention, and in mere moments was back on top of both women. Elijah could hear the screaming and tried desperately to get back up, though all the while struggling to regain his composure. He then gathered all his strength and began yelling and calling for the bear to come attack him for a third time. This time though, as the bear tackled him to the ground, Elijah felt one of the worst pains of his entire life. It was the bear's canines piercing the back of his eyes as the beast's jaw was clamped down on his face, as well as the back of the neck, though as this happened, the pain must have been too great, as within a couple of seconds, Elijah blacked out and went limp. Moments later, shots began ringing out around the attack site. All Elijah remembers is turning to his back and staring at the gray sky above, still confused and wondering to what just happened. All he really had on his mind was the question, what happened to my wife and sister-in-law? Were they still alive, or were they badly hurt? He didn't know, and worse yet, he couldn't move, almost paralyzed by the sheer pain of his entire body. All he could do is lie there and pray to God that everyone was still okay. Surrounded by deathly silence though, he couldn't help but to wonder what was going on, until he began seeing the movement out of the corner of his eyes that was. Still deathly afraid that it was the polar bear coming back to finish him off, he closed his eyes and braced for impact. Then suddenly out of nowhere, he heard a woman's voice shouting to see if they were okay and walking towards them. Elijah, realizing that help finally arrived, quickly raised his hand up to let the person know that he was okay. Then he noticed a female walking towards him, but it wasn't his wife or sister-in-law, it was the pastor's wife, and she managed to shoot the bear and save their lives. She then walked up to Elijah and squeezed his hand, letting him know that it was going to be okay now. Then minutes later, he would also hear his wife and sister-in-law's voice confirming that they too were okay and had survived this horrible ordeal. Due to his injuries though, he was only awake for a few more moments before passing back out. The three were then helicoptered to the nearest hospital to treat their wounds. Elijah doesn't really remember too much after that, but eventually he had to be moved to a better medical center in Ottawa due to his severe injuries. But amazingly, all three friends managed to make a complete recovery from this nightmare, making them among some of the luckiest people on Earth. And with that being said, once again, thank you for watching. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons and turn on the notification bell for more content in the future. Goodbye for now.